Hello, this is the last chapter. You'll find it is the last chapter in your textbook. It's entitled Global Economic Justice. It's chapter 18. I know you said we probably skipped a few chapters. Well, those chapters are very valuable chapters, but I thought that this chapter was probably more valuable to us in that we'll be talking about justice issues, particularly economic justice issues, as it relates to our global society. Let me give you just a few definitions again. First of all, the term globalization refers to an increasing global connectivity, integration, and interdependency in the economic, social, technological, cultural, political, and ecological spheres. Globalization is an umbrella term and is perhaps best understood as a unitary process inclusive of many sub-processes such as enhanced economic independency, increased cultural influence, rapid advances in information technology, and novel governance and geopolitical challenges that are increasingly binding people and the biosphere more tightly into a global system. An example of globalization was the invention of the telephone. As a result of transportation and communication, the world has become smaller. There are several other definitions that you can find of globalization, and as we talk about this global economic justice, there's a couple other little terms I'd like to familiarize you with. And you can find some of these in your textbook, such as justice. Justice is the morality of people getting what is fair and what is due to them. Right, R-I-G-H-T, a claim or entitlement of something, a moral demand that obligates others to honor it. Then we have negative rights and positive right. A negative right, a person's right that obligates others not to interfere with that person's obtained something. And positive right, a person's right that obligates others to help that person obtain something. Those are, I think, some real basic terms. We'll talk about a few other terms as we move along here. But there's a box, I believe on page 759 in your textbook, thereabout, that talks about some very vital stats related to the planet's poor and the hungry. It says now roughly there's about 6.7 billion people on the face of the planet. And they say about 1.4 billion people live in extreme poverty. Every day, 1 in 7 people go to bed hungry. 26,000 children under the age of 5 die every day from preventable causes and illnesses. In 2005, the richest 20% of the world consumed 75% of the world's goods. There's a great disparity in that. 1.1 billion people do not have access to clean water, clean drinking water in this world. Each year, 8 million children die from diarrhea and other health problems caused by unclean water and inadequate sanitation. Some years ago I found a little analogy that helped me, and I'd like to share it with you, help you understand the kind of world that we live, and it puts it into very small perspectives for us. And let me share that with you. It says, if the world was reduced to a village of 1,000 people, so I know when we talk about billions of people, most of us have difficulty in understanding what a billion is about. But we can understand thousands. If the world was reduced to a village of 1,000 people, there would be 520 women and 480 men. Roughly there's 52% of our world's population of women. There would be 700 to 800 people of color. Roughly 70 to 80% of our world consists of people of color, and 200 to 300 whites. There would be 584 Asians, 124 Africans, 84 Latin Americans, 95 Eastern and Western Europeans, 55 Russians, 52 North Americans, 4 Australians, and 2 New Zealanders. Now, when you look at those numbers, just those raw numbers right there in percentages, what we're saying as we're talking about consumption, that the people who are consuming the most or the richest live in those areas where we have the smallest number of people. In terms of religion, there would be 129 Christians, 178 Muslims, 167 people who are non-religious, 132 Hindus, 86 of other religions, 62 Buddhists, 45 atheists, and 3 Jews. Now, let's talk about living standards, and let's talk about literacy, let's talk about housing. If the world was reduced to a village of 1,000 people, there would be 800 people living in substandard housing. 80% of the world's population live in substandard housing. 700 people unable to read. 70% of the world's population is illiterate. 500 people malnourished. Half of the world's population is malnourished. There would be 330 children. 1/3 of the world's population are under the age of 18. 60 people over the age of 65. 60 people would have 50% of the world's wealth, and most of them would live in the United States of America. 28 babies are born each year, and there are 10 university graduates. So when we start talking about global economic justice, we need to understand who are we talking about. Let me share some other just information here as we talk about these issues of justice and economic justice. First of all, the percentage of people living on less than $2 a day has decreased greatly in areas affected by globalization, whereas poverty rates in other areas have remained largely stagnant. In East Asia, including China, the percentage has decreased by 50.1% compared to 2.2% increases in sub-Saharan Africa. The income inequalities for the world as a whole has diminished. Life expectancy has almost doubled in the developing world since World War II, and is starting to close the gap between itself and developed worlds where the improvement has been smaller. Even in sub-Saharan Africa, the least developed region, life expectancy increased from 30 years before World War II was about a peak of about 50 years before the AIDS epidemic, and other diseases started to force it down in the current level over the last 47 years. Infant mortality has decreased in every developing region in the world. Feminism has made great advances in areas such as Bangladesh through economic liberating and empowering women with jobs. If you were able to watch the Olympics of 2012, you saw that every country had at least one woman athlete that came to the Olympics. The proportion of the world's population living in countries where the per capita food supplies are less than 2,200 calories per day decreased from 56% in the mid-1960s to below 10% in the 1990s. Between 1950 and 1999, global literacy increased from 52% to 81% of the world. Women made up much of that gap. Female literacy as a percentage of male literacy has increased from 59% in 1970 to 80% in the year 2000. The percentage of children in the labor workforce has fallen from 24% in 1960 to only 10% in 2000. There are similar increasing trends toward electric power, cars, radios, televisions, telephones, and other items of convenience per capita, as well as growing proportions of the population have a greater access to clean water. Well, I say all that to say to you that these moral issues have had a detrimental effect on our society and on our global affairs. I said that I would share a couple additional definitions and terms with you, and those terms do include things such as the duty of beneficent, the moral obligation to benefit others. Secondly, regulatory actions, conduct that is above and beyond the duty, not required, but praiseworthy, which all of us ought to think about and consider in our lives. Retributive justice, as we talked about capital punishment. I think we talked about the terms of retributive justice and distributive justice. Retributive justice is justice considered fair punishment for wrongdoings. Distributive justice is justice considering fair distribution of the society's goods. That's what needs to take place in this global warfare that we currently live in. I believe that the way to solve the problem of hunger is that we just need to pass the bread down the table. If you've ever sat at a Thanksgiving dinner and you sat at one end of the table and the food started at the other end of the table, if people at the other end of the table took too much, by the time it got to you, at the end of the table there was not enough to go around. So those rich countries need to share their wealth. A couple of moral theories that's advocated in this particular chapter is the libertarian theory of justice. The doctrine emphasizes individual liberties and negative rights, and rejecting positive rights as a violation of personal freedom. And the egalitarian theory of justice is a doctrine holding that justice requires social benefits among all persons. As you probably heard me share just a minute ago, I'm a strong advocate of the egalitarian theory of justice. Again, I'd like to thank you all for your attentiveness, and as I've shared I think some very significant, vital information related to global economic justice. I again encourage you to read the chapter, to read a number of those primary source documents that you find at the end of the chapter, and yes, you'll be assigned some of the case studies at the end of that chapter. I hope you've enjoyed your study of ethics this term. We hope that something has been said throughout the term. One of the topics, as we talked about the last half of the term, applied ethics, we hope that one of those topics has really touched you in a way that has changed your life, that you'll continue to study and learn about those topics so you can articulate those topics using the theories that you learned in the early part of the textbook and the early part of the course. Again, thank you for being such great scholars, and good luck in your future academic activities and pursuits.